Hello, my name is Charlie Miller, and I'm here interviewing Lorna Mae Devera. Today's date is June 9th, 2023, and we're interviewing via Zoom. The first question I'm going to ask you is your date and place of birth.
My date and place of birth is Oakland, California, Highland Hospital on November 8th, 1973.
All right, and can you tell me a little bit about your parents, their occupations, and if they served in the military, kind of that history?
Sure. My parents did not serve in the military. I'm actually first generation. So my parents are immigrants from the Philippines. And my father actually just turned 91 on May 25th. He was born in 1932. So he did live through the Japanese occupation of the Philippines. So although he didn't serve, he did experience having to live in a country that was occupied by a foreign national. So when they immigrated here to the United States, they both ended up in Stockton, California. And because they only had a grade school education, opportunities were very limited to them. English was their second language. So they started out as blue collars. They started out as farm workers, agricultural people out in Stockton. And then my mother was able to eventually make her way to Silicon Valley, working the night shift at one of the Silicon Valley tech companies. And then my father went on to transition into a professional landscaper where he retired from Cal State University, Hayward, and they did a name change. It's now California State University, East Bay. And so that is what they did for their occupations.
Nice. And what schooling did you have before entering the military?
I'm sorry, what?
What schooling and education did you have?
So I graduated from high school with the general education from Mount Eden High School in Hayward in 1991. And I went on to community college in San Diego, California, where I took my general ed courses. And then I later transferred to the San Diego campus of the University of Phoenix, where I graduated with a bachelor's in business marketing.
And did you have any jobs emerging from college, or did you go straight to the military?
I did have jobs. Actually, my very first job that till this day I love and I always talk about was when I turned 15. My very first job was at a McDonald's at our local mall. And it was so fun and so cool because my fellow girlfriends and guy friends, we all worked together. I worked the morning shift and, we earned $4.25 an hour, but we just had so much fun. I mean, I'm so thankful I had that experience as a high schooler because a lot of them were jocks. And I think 3 of us were cheerleaders. So this was an extra way to earn income to, pay for our cheerleading stuff. So that was my very first job at 15. And then I went on and then had normal mall jobs and then administrative jobs. And then when I moved down to San Diego, I would say my first, real job as an 18-year-old was working at the Black Angus in Chula Vista as a hostess. And so from there, I actually graduated high school at 17. So I was living on my own, meaning, no parents and family, but roommates from 17 to 19. And at 19 is when I eventually enlisted in the Navy.
And what were your motivations for joining the military initially?
So many. It would take this entire interview. But to narrow it down, so as I mentioned, I was a hostess at Black Angus, and I worked the night shift because I was going to school during the day. So the motivation was living on my own and income being limited, but yet I was paying for my own education, and I had a travel bug. So when I worked the evening shifts, fortunately for me, the Black Angus was located next to 32nd Street in San Diego. And 32nd Street is one of the most biggest U.S. Navy bases that we have, because that's where our ships are stationed on the West. Some of our ships are stationed on the West Coast. So when these ships would return from Westpac deployments, the Western Pacific deployments, that when they're on deployments, they're about on for from 6 to 8 months. Typically these sailors, young people my age, 18, 19, 20, would come into Chula Vista Black Agnes for that all-American comfort steak, mashed potato, baked potato meal. So as a hostess, I would greet them, just like any restaurant, and say, at the time, believe it or not, there was still smoking in restaurants. So the question would be smoking or non, how many? And then I'd find the table and escort them back, right? So as a hostess, I chose to do small talk because I'm an extrovert. So, typically they have identification that marks them as being in the U.S. Navy. So the small talk conversations are, why'd you join the Navy? And the typical responses would be, I joined because I wanted to get out of my state. So a lot of them were from the Midwest that I came across, at least. They wanted money for school and they wanted to see the world. And knowing that these guys were the exact same age I was, and I was in the same situation, that I needed money for school, I wanted to see the world and get out of eventually California at one point, I did my research, which was at a library, pre-internet, and I found out what worked, what didn't work, what my interests were, and I that's what led me to a recruiting office to, start the process.
What were your parents and other friends and family members' thoughts on you making this decision?
Oh, that's a great question, because it was such a variation of reactions. So, I'm actually the youngest of 6 girls. So I'm number 6, and they're all girls. And as I said, my parents are immigrants. So there's a lot of cultural and family traditions that I broke. I didn't stay home like my sisters, meaning they all stayed local for college. So, traditionally it's, you go to, you have something after high school, right? Whether you go to trade school or you go to college. So my sisters went to college, got married, got a job, had a family, bought the house, et cetera, et cetera. So I just saw that because all my sisters are 2 years apart. So it's like next wedding, next pregnancy, next house. And so my dad really was basically the one that said, you don't have to follow in that tradition if you don't want to. And that really gave me an opening to think outside the box. So when it came to the decision of reactions, years later of me actually enlisting in the military, my dad both my parents were very supportive, but my mother, of course, being a mother of her youngest baby girl, who is an American born, but not from a military family, was very, surprised, shocked, worried, scared, sad. Daughter's leaving, unknown, wouldn't know how to help me if I were ever in any trouble, wouldn't know where I would be. There's so many emotions from my mom's side. And to make it, to really draw it out, it's kind of cute and kind of funny, because I was living in San Diego and my parents were living in Hayward. So back in the day, we had landlines, no cell phones. So after I had signed the paperwork saying that I was going to join the Navy, is when I called my parents. And so typically when I called my parents, my mom would take the call from the kitchen and my dad would go to the master bedroom and take the call from there. And so that's how I was able to speak to both my parents. So when I made the announcement I enlisted in the Navy, my girlfriends were around me, 18, 19 giddy girlfriends. And I'm like, I enlisted in the Navy. And my dad's initial reaction was like, you're number 1. That's great. Where do you get to go? Are you going to serve on my ship? While simultaneously, my mom was like, what? What are you doing? You're going to go to war? Are you kidding me? What about your hair? Are you going to cut your hair? And so lots of mixed reactions. And I just had to I didn't have to worry about my dad, but I had to reassure my mom it was going to be okay. I wanted to do this. Have faith in me. Trust me. I know what I'm doing. So she was very supportive, but like any mom, any job, military or not military, a mother's going to worry. So she worried till the day I retired. So that was their reactions. That was mom and dad reactions. As for the girlfriends' reactions, they were like, but it's boot camp. It's so hard. You're going to go away. You have to get everything revolved around my hair. You're going to have to cut your hair and waking up and getting yelled at. And my mindset was really different. My mindset was set on, my laptop timed out. So I got to log back in. But my mindset was, I really needed money for school at this point. Let me log back in. And I was young enough to know that it was going to be now or never, and I wouldn't have this opportunity again. So my mindset was really focused on, I'm going to get paid to work out. I'm going to be in the best shape of my life, and 3 meals are going to be provided to me a day. Because I don't know if you've heard the phrase yet or not. I'm sure you will eventually, maybe. But back in the day, the phrase was starving student. So I was a starving student for 2 years. And so I knew that I wasn't going to have to, starve anymore in the sense I would have 3 prepared meals. So the girlfriends were surprised. They giggled. I think they worried. I think they were surprised that I actually broke from the wolf pack to do it. But everybody at the end of the day was very, very supportive.
That's good to hear. Can you talk a little bit about the recruitment process and like enlisting in the military and like what branch you chose and why?
Sure. So I chose the Navy for reasons that I guess I was influenced growing up. And so as I said, my dad lived through the Japanese occupation of the Philippines during World War II. And so I think I also mentioned my mother worked the night shifts. So with my mother working the night shifts, my dad had babysitting duty, I guess. So he and I'm sure it was about 5 years old, and it's funny because when I do say this, when I do presentations, I'm like, I don't necessarily think it was responsible parenting, but it was my dad's style of parenting. We would watch war movies together. So when we would watch these war movies, and other movies from the 80s, such as Magnum P.I. and the A-Team, and you had Charlie's Angels. You had all these, law enforcement shows that have some type of veteran background. One musical from that time frame was South Pacific. So you combine all of that, and for me, what I took out of it was it just looks so glamorous. To travel, the service part came later, right? So the initial reaction is like, wow, look at how much they're funding. Look how much fun they were having. And in that movie, the South Pacific, there's actually a scene where you had like 20 nurses, information running on the beach. And that just looks so sharp to me. That military, camaraderie, the structure, their appearance, their confidence. And that just really influenced me. So I think a lot of images influenced me to actually plant the seed to like the military. And specifically the Navy, it was because it just looked so much more fun and pretty. You think about the Navy, it's going to be by the water. You think about the Army and Air Force, and it's like landlocked, nothing pretty, nothing glamorous. And with the Navy, it was so attracted to me because it had aviation, it had submarines, it had Navy SEALs, it had all of that, and the other branches, it was just like, blah to me. So that's actually what drove me to the Navy, because even though at my time, opportunities for women were still very limited, there was always going to be a role, whether it was a support, which is where I started. So if I weren't necessarily on the field, I would at least be a referee on the sideline. So that is how I was able to pinpoint specifically that I wanted the Navy. And as far as the recruiting process, as I said, not that 19 is older, but I had already lived on my own for 2 years. So it was a little bit easier for me to navigate because I knew what questions to ask, what I wanted, what I didn't want, to have a very decent conversation with the recruiter.
And was there anything unique to going through the recruiting process as a young woman versus what your male counterparts would have had?
The unique one, off the top of my head, I think it was, I think it would be, I honestly, I think it was pretty standard aside from them saying that, if you get pregnant, you're not going to be able to go to the boot camp. So I think that's the only difference, because if I did get pregnant between the day I signed the paperwork to the day I was actually supposed to get on a bus to go to basic training, I wouldn't be physically capable of going through that training. So that was fair guidance to say, if you get pregnant, you're not going to be able to go to basic training. So I had to make a decision.
Yeah. What was basic training like for you?
Again, I because I don't know who's going to hear this, right? So I would hate to influence an 18-year-old girl or 18-year-old recruit saying, oh, it's going to be fun because this girl that I watched on video said it was fun. I was older again, so I had a different mindset. Plus, I was coming from California as opposed to a small town with only 40 people from a different state, right? And California is very, very diverse. So for me, it was a blast. For others, it could be intimidating because you're dealing with so many personalities all at once. You have people yelling at you, so you have to factor in the backgrounds, right? I had 5 older sisters who were always yelling at me. So getting yelled at from someone in uniform was like one in out the other kind of thing. So for me, I just knew what my mindset was, and basic training, I already knew the goal was to graduate me. The goal was not to fail me. The goal was to weed out those so that way it wouldn't be a burden to either. It wouldn't be a burden to the recruiter, and it wouldn't be a burden to the Navy if they couldn't make boot camp. So it's a development process and it's a weeding process. So for me, as I said, it was fun. I was getting paid. I knew I was going to be in the best shape of my life. I had 3 meals a day, and I was investing in my career at that point because I was going to learn a skill set.
What were some of what was like a typical day in the life in boot camp? Like, what were the skills you learned and the activities you did, drills and
teamwork? Stuff? You had to learn teamwork, communication, and patience. And the daily routine was getting up at the same time and having a routine, a very strict routine, and you had to do it together. So at basic training, there were 80 of us all in one room. So it was bunk bed galore, right? And it was the same process. You get up, you shower, your time, make your bed, have to be at breakfast on time, go to class, study, do physical activities, do team building activities, and get along with people, right? I mean, it's hard enough to get along with people, whether you're at school or at a job as a grown-up. So imagine having to live with someone, go to training with them, and eat with them. I mean, that's a self-development skill right there that's super valuable.
What were some of your first assignments after boot camp?
So after basic training, there are at the time, there were 2 different career tracks. One was going into active duty and the other was going into the reserves, but everybody started out in basic training. So I happened to choose the reserve path, which means I did go to basic training, and then I had apprenticeship training, and then I was discharged from active duty and then affiliated immediately into the reserves. So my first unit out of basic training was aboard the USS Dixon, which is a submarine tender based out of Point Loma in San Diego. So that was my first assignment. Then that ship got decommissioned. And then I was transferred to Officer of Construction, OICC PAT. Can't remember what it all stood for, but I know it's Officer in Charge of Construction, Pacific. So that was basically a CB engineering command unit that I did a few years there. And then after that, I ended up going to a unit called SPAWAR. And they have since changed their name, and I believe their new name is called NAVWAR. So those were my assignments pre 9/11.
What about, I feel like you're hinting at something there. What about post 9/11?
I wasn't necessarily hinting, but that 9/11 really separated, it really separated why I enlisted and then why I stayed. Because when you enlist, you don't have to stay, right? So I think I alluded to earlier, I started for the basics of needing money for school, wanting to travel, meet new friends, get out of California. But after 9/11, then that's where the service component kicked in. That's where, you know what? This is my country. What the heck just happened? Oh my gosh, I need to step up. I want to protect. I want to defend. This is the United States of America. I had been to third countries. My family immigrated from a third world country. So I understood at that point, professionally, personally, mature-wise, age-wise, what the cost would be if we didn't have a military to defend the Constitution and the freedom and the liberties that we had. I mean, all of that just hit me all at once. Like, what just happened? When, you look at the images, for me, on television, right? Twin Towers and just chaos and what is going on and the death and the heartache and the loss and the confusion. What's next? And here I am, I wouldn't coin me as a spoiled brat. I would coin me as an American who had a lot of freedom and a lot of luxuries and was allowed to be carefree. So I had that lifestyle because of the country and how the country was established to have that type of lifestyle. So for me, when 9/11 happened, the paranoia was, that's what they're attacking. They're attacking my opportunity to be carefree. They're attacking my opportunity to be a woman, to get an education. And so 9/11 happened, and then that's when I stepped up. I said, okay, I need to do more. I want to do more than just 1 week in a month. So at that point, I made a decision after my October drill weekend at SPAWAR. My commanding officer at the time made an incredible, opening remark during our drill weekend. A drill weekend consists of one Saturday and one Sunday. And he basically, the one sentence that I took away from him was, life as we know it will never be the same. And he thanked everybody who, it was a unit with senior officers who had more experience. I was still very young and very junior at that time, so I didn't have the same experience as everybody else in the unit. And I just remember him saying, I want to thank everybody who came in that day to help stand up the command center. And that I took, nothing was personal, right? But I took that personally, like, oh my gosh, I'm a dirtbag. What did I do? I ended up going home and I was watching the news. So when you hear stories, and maybe like the movie, I think Sniper with Bradley Cooper.
American Sniper.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I think his character is based on a real life story, and he felt compelled and he went into a recruiting station and he enlisted, right? So same thing for me, right? I took it more seriously. So it really is the same thing. It's like, how can I step up my game? I already have the uniform. So what more can I do to contribute, right? To contribute. So I made the decision after 9/11, after thinking, okay, how can I contribute, right? I was administrative at that point. So in my mind, I was saying, I'm not a pilot, so I can't go fly jets. I'm not a surface warfare officer, so I can't go drive ships. And I'm not an intelligence officer who can go crunch data in a SCIF. And a SCIF is an acronym for Secured Compartmentalized Office with no windows, right? So I'm like, okay, well, what can I do? What can I do? And then it dawned on me, my background is in marketing. I had internships in meeting and event planning. I initially started out as a hospitality major because I really thought I was going to go into the hotel industry and manage resorts and restaurants, to satisfy that travel bug, right? Because there's hotels all over the world. So I just was able to think of how can I apply my skill set? And then it just dawned on me because warfighters aren't thinking meeting and event planning, but I was. So that was going to be my in. My in was nobody's thinking about planning for the 9/11 2002 one-year anniversary. So I took that upon myself and I packed my Jeep and I drove across country to DC and I just knocked down doors and, found my way both, in the military and in the civilian sector because I was a reservist. I wasn't an active duty person. And I asked for an assignment at the Pentagon. So the funny story behind that is I show up to DC and I say, I would like to drill at the Pentagon. And everybody looked at me like, okay, well, who are you? And so I gave them my story. Like I drove across country. I really want to contribute. And it was, it's more detailed than that. But the result was they did do me the favor and they found me an assignment at the Pentagon where it was one of those ideas. It was one of those things like, I can't blow it, right? I just ditched my entire comfortable life to pursue this dream of mine, this vision to contribute equivalently, but with my skill set to the Navy, to the country. And so, the day came when they're like, okay, we got to start planning this. And I was the first to raise my hat. I was the first to volunteer. I was the one to think about X, Y, and Z, because these are operational warfighters. So they're thinking, not what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, okay, we're going to need garbage bags. We're going to need, to know where the restrooms are. We're going to need to know a guest list and all that. And so that's how I was able to, I want to say weasel my way in, but that's basically how I established myself out here on the East Coast. And then, it's very senior out here on the East Coast. And so fortunately, with all that hard work, it was recognized and I was able to get mentors who helped continue my professional development from that one opportunity.
Wow. A couple thoughts there. I hear you say the word weasel, but I actually think you just identified the things that you were uniquely good at and then you down on them. And that can come in any way, shape, or form, right? In the military, because there's so many different roles. But I would love to hear, since like that event was an important thing to getting you to the East Coast, like how did that event go? Is there anything you'd like to share about that important day? I guess it was an anniversary of it was the first anniversary of 9/11 that you guys had an event.
Correct. So it was at the Pentagon and it was very solemn, it's very sad because I was meeting people who actually lost people that day, somebody that I was working along someone who was working along someone else that was lost on that tragic day for no reason. Right. So it was, it was emotional and it was kind of also, how do I do it? It was kind of like sad because you're planning an event, but it's not a good event. Right. But it's not a good event, but it is a good event because we're not forgetting. So a lot of ups and downs, right? A lot of emotions. It's great that we're doing this, but it bites that we're having to do this to begin with. But I took value in knowing I was, again, like you pointed out, applying my skill set to provide that comfort for the family who's never been to DC, who's never been to the Pentagon, who didn't even know what their son or daughter or spouse did in the military. To be behind the scenes to make that happen. It was rewarding in the sense that whether it was closure or just knowing I can provide that comfort that your family member is not forgotten, it is what I take away from that.
And I guess how was like the military's reaction? Because obviously, like you got a job at the Pentagon. Where did you like exit the military basically, or
What do you mean exit the military?
well, while you
You went up. I'm sorry.
were you still a reserve like while you were working for the Pentagon?
Yes. So that everything that I just described to you was in a reserve status. So it was my reserve unit. So the way it works also is a reserve unit is there to support the active duty unit. So the active duty unit needed support, and this is what my reserve unit was able to do. They did many things, but this is the one thing that we were able to do. So not only when I moved out here, not only did I have to find, the priority was to find a position at the Pentagon because that's why I moved out here, but that was only part-time. So the other ball I had to juggle was finding a civilian job too. So I was working both jobs, no different than what my life was in San Diego, but now I was doing it out here from scratch because I really had no family and I really had no friends. So I had to really, feast or famine, figure it out here. The way I was able to make it out here to begin with was that I had one connection. And the one connection I had was one of my best girlfriends from high school. She married her high school sweetheart. So all three of us went to high school together. And he ended up enlisting in the Marines, and they just happened to be stationed out here. So I gave her a call, and I'm like, Angelique, I need a place to stay. And she's like, okay, well, you can stay with Alyssa. And Alyssa, I think, was her 4 or 5-year-old daughter at that time. So here I was in my late 20s on a bunk bed with a roommate that was about 5 years old. And so, of course, it's going through my mind like, what did I just do? My life sucks. What is going on? Because at that age group, my girlfriends were getting married. Everybody was more settled. And here I was literally consciously made the choice to start all over 3,000 miles away from everybody. And, my girlfriend, we couldn't really even hang out because our lifestyles was different. She was a mom. She was a wife, she had a job, and then it was me like, okay, I need a job. I need to figure this out. So that's how I began my life out here on the East Coast. A lot of hustling.
Are you still like a reserve today, or have you resigned from the military?
I retired in 2018 after 24 years.
Oh, what was your rank when you exited?
So in 2008, I actually was lucky to be selected for a commission. So I was actually commissioned as a public affairs officer. So I retired at the rank of lieutenant.
Wow. And did you have any more like experiences in the military? Like were you called out of the reserves, or were you pretty much in the reserves most of the time?
So I was in my entire career, both enlisted and officer, I was under the reserve umbrella. However, I think starting in 2004 or 5, I think it's 2005, I started what is an endearing term called a professional reservist. And so what that term means is I was a reservist who was always on active duty for special work. So I was on back-to-back reserve orders. So basically, on paper, I was a reservist on orders, but I was on active duty, but as a reservist. And so for the last, I would say 2005, 18, 15. So for more than a decade, I was, I think it rounded out to like maybe 13 years. I was on active duty. I no longer had a civilian job. I did have civilian jobs in between orders. And so the way I like to describe that is like, being a starving actress, they go wait tables in between, their acting gigs. So in between my active duty for special work gigs, I was able to find administrative work for corporations through a staffing agency. And so a lot of my active duty assignments. So the last 10 years of my career, I was busy. I was hustling. So I was working. So I was commissioned, and then I was commissioned in DC. I went from DC to Naples, Italy, where my assignment was for a program or effort that was called Africa Partnership Station. So that was a U.S. Navy humanitarian effort, and I covered that as a PAO, public affairs officer, and then that was for 6 months. After that, I ended up going to Afghanistan for a year. So I was in Afghanistan for a year, and then after that ended, I was in recruiting for 2 years out of San Francisco, Navy Recruiting District, San Francisco. That's based out of Mountain View, California. And then after 2 years of recruiting, I came back to DC, and I think I was on my last active duty orders. Maybe that was for 6 months, 6, 8, 9 months, something like that. And then my very, very final year, it ended the way it began, which was 1 week in a month and 2 weeks a year.
Nice. And I guess you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing today, and like if you have any ties still back to the military, like if you're supporting them in any way.
Yes. So I'm currently employed with Leidos, and I am a government contractor. I'm actually a cleared government contractor, which means I do have a security clearance. And I am on a contract where the customer is actually the Department of the Navy. So I serve as one of 9 customer advocacy managers. And what we do is we're responsible, mathematically, it just works out where each customer advocacy manager, CAM for short, is responsible for 3 claimants. And so basically, my claimants are NASI, Naval Sea Systems Command, BUPERS, Bureau of Personnel in the United States Naval Academy. So basically, whenever those 3 customers of mine have any issues, escalations, concerns, or routine ordering of network services, I am their starting point. If they're not able to find someone who can help them, they come to me. If they have a problem, they come to me, and I locate and I follow up. I locate a subject matter expert, and I follow up until their question or concern is resolved and addressed.
Nice. Well, I feel like that pretty much jumps to today. One circling question that you feel free to do not have to answer this, but I am doing like a school project of people of color in the military, and I was wondering, being a woman of color, if you could speak to that a little bit in your experience.
It's funny because people have asked me that, right? And for me, I don't necessarily feel any differently being a woman of color. I think, so there's 2 categories that I fall into. There's the woman of color, and then there's just plain old being a woman. So I think if I have had any moments like that, it falls more in the bucket of being a woman than being a woman of color. If there were any situations where it would have been a woman of color thing, it really went over my head. But I think I have more with the fact that I'm a woman.
Okay. Mohammed, do you have any other questions?
Do you mind if we just talk a little bit more about that? Would you say that changed actually since you were in for such a long period of time? Do you felt like that there were, maybe any differences early in your career versus later in your career?
I think it was easier and more fun in the beginning because the expectations were low. She's junior, it's fun. I think it became more evident for me as I started to climb, because then it was more competitive, more challenging, more having to prove yourself, more having to explain yourself. And it is exhausting. So I'm of the school, and this is something that I actually learned in the military along with my dad. it was more, I think I was able to survive more than 2 decades because it's just like, yo, buddy, you got a problem? You're going to have to figure it out because I'm not going anywhere.
Right.
So that's pretty much how I have had the longevity. You know, yeah. So I think, I think it was fun and easy in the beginning, but I think it became more challenging as I started coming up the ranks.
Yeah. And then do you mind also just commenting a little bit about kind of the relationship with fellow women in the reserves? Is it tend to be a camaraderie, or is it maybe a situation where you're doing your best just to kind of move yourself forward? Is there any dynamic that you've observed, even again in the past versus current, and just how women work together in the reserves or in the Navy?
Sure, I would say it's all of the above.
Yeah.
You know, because I think it's all of the above in the sense you're dealing with the personality, and the personality that I'm going to get from a female is the exact same personality I'm going to get from the male. So it just depends for me, what their motivation is, right? If they want to do it on their own, then yeah, they're going to just totally disregard me kind of thing.
Yeah.
If they want friendship, if they want a teammate, if they want a buddy system to help get through that hump, then they're going to reach out. So for me, it was basically just personality, male or female, because I saw both.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think in any part of life, sometimes you feel partnership and sometimes you don't.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. And then for me, it's just like you have to adapt. It's like, hey, I want to be your friend. Okay, you don't want to be my friend? Okay, that's fine. I'll move on. I'll find someone else.
And then sorry, just 2 other pit stops, I guess. Well, obviously Afghanistan or Africa. Was there anything kind of around those that you'd like to add to the archive, just around those places where you spend time?
I'm thankful for both opportunities. I am grateful that I had a chance to not only wear my uniform, serve my country, and represent the American flag among other countries that were serving alongside of us. So I'm grateful for that opportunity, and I have gratitude that I had the experience to just meet other people with different just from different countries and cultures, because that's something that I always wanted and something that I always craved and something that always interested me is just meeting different people. And I had to do that. I had a chance to do that with the common foundation of, serving and defending our freedoms and our respective cultures and heritages. And I love that. And we all bonded, we didn't necessarily look the same. We didn't necessarily speak the same language. We didn't wear the same, uniforms. We didn't eat the same foods, but we had that common goal. And that was to defend and protect our way of living. And I loved that.
Oh, that says it all, kind of.
Yeah. So it was great, and with Afghanistan, I had a chance to serve outside. I had a chance to serve with other folks outside of the Navy. So for example, the first 6 months I was in Afghanistan, I was so, I'm a class clown, I'm a goofball. And so it was so much fun because the first 6 months I was in southern Afghanistan with the Marines and the Brits and the, United Kingdom service members. And so Marines are different than me. And then you have me, who's the oddball. I'm Navy, I'm female, all that good stuff. And so it was just very different. But what I loved about it was the office that I ended up in were two British, one was Army, one was Royal Air Force. And, being a product of the 80s, it was just so much fun because I would just do trivia about 80s music, like, okay, name a song from Duran Duran, name a song from, Boy George. And so that was my first 6 months. And, you had real life situations going on, right? But that's how I would balance it out, the stressors of the day. And then you go up to I ended up going up to northern Afghanistan, and I had the chance to serve with people from Germany. My boss was Germany and Croatia and gosh, their chocolate, the chocolate. I always tease them because of what's the famous chocolate?
You mean it from Switzerland?
Yeah. So I would, so Swiss. So I'm losing. I can't think of it right now, but just different countries, and I really love that. And then with the Army, so the U.S. counterpart that I served with up there was Army. Vice in the South, it was with the Marines.
Cool. Thank you so much for your service and doing the interview. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I want to say to everybody I served with, thank you so much for helping me get through that 24-year mark. I couldn't have done it without them. And I love all of my mentors and role models who really helped me get to this very day where I can share this story. So thank you.